You've been drinking water as soon as you wake up for years, without sugar, without anything, just water, believing that it's one of the healthiest habits you have. What no one told you is that the temperature of that water may be contradicting exactly what your body needs at that moment. It's not the water that's at fault. It's the time and the temperature. Research on the morning vascular response indicates that the body of a man over 50 reacts differently to thermal stimuli when fasting than that of a man in his 30s. What at another time of day would be indifferent first thing in the morning when the circulatory system is just coming out of a night's sleep can generate a response that many men feel for hours without knowing where it comes from. Today you're going to understand. Before going further, I want to debunk something, an idea you've been repeating for years without questioning it. You know what it's like to wake up and the first thing you do is go get water. Do you know what it's like to feel that first glass of water as something good, as an act of care towards your own body? Do you know what it's like to notice that despite that starting in the morning still takes longer than it should? And the hands that take a long time to warm up, the legs that feel heavy before you can even take your first steps, that first quarter of an hour when your body seems to resist functioning and you think you're doing well. This didn't start yesterday. Many men in this age group have been following this same morning ritual for years, convinced that hydrating on an empty stomach is, by definition, a correct habit. And it is. The mistake isn't in the water. It's in something that almost no one mentions when talking about morning hydration. What the circulatory system is doing at that exact moment and how it responds to an unexpected thermal stimulus. A significant proportion of men over 50 who report morning heaviness or cold extremities upon waking are unknowingly maintaining a habit that directly affects vascular regulation during the first part of the day. And there's a specific reason for that. It's not that you've been doing things wrong. It's just that the information you had was incomplete. With the right information, you can make different decisions. What happens in your blood vessels doesn't start when you open your eyes. During sleep, peripheral circulation works in a different way. Body temperature drops, blood pressure decreases, and blood vessels adapt to their resting state. When you wake up, this system needs to be progressively reactivated. Research on the morning vascular response indicates that in men over 50, this transition between the nocturnal state and the active state is slow and more sensitive than at an earlier age. A thermal stimulus at that time, especially if it goes against the direction in which the system is trying to move, can generate a circulatory response that many men feel for hours without relating it to what they did as soon as they woke up. What you drink on an empty stomach doesn't just hydrate. That's precisely why I prepared something specifically for this group of men. The digital book, 7 Habits That Make You Wake Up Tired After 40 Inside. You will identify which of your usual morning habits has a direct connection to how your circulatory system responds in the first part of the day, a habit that you have never associated with that slow start. You will understand why the body of a man over 50 processes morning stimuli differently. And why could what previously functioned successfully now be operating in reverse? And you will find a first concrete adjustment implementable this week without changing your entire routine. Designed for the man who wants to understand the root, not just manage the symptoms. And there is something inside that surprises most. Among the 7 habits, there is one directly related to the morning vascular response, which most repeat in their fasting routine without knowing what they are accumulating. If any of what you just heard sounded familiar, the link is in the pinned comment. The morning vascular response does not wait. The first step is to know which of these habits is yours. You need not accept these feelings, nor must you understand it alone. That is why we are here. I'm Carmen Navarro. For over 20 years, I've been researching and sharing scientific studies on men's health to help men make informed decisions. What I've observed time and time again is that when it comes to diet, the right question is almost never what to eat, but how and when. And today, that question has a specific name: cold water or warm water on an empty stomach. It seems like a minor question, but it's not. The circulatory system doesn't work the same at 5 as it did at 35. It's not a deterioration. It's an adaptation. Blood vessels lose some of their elasticity with age. Thermal regulation slows down on the body's ability to adapt to temperature changes, especially in the early part of the day when it comes to waking up from its nighttime rest. Requires more time and more care. Research on vascular thermoregulation in middle-aged men indicates that morning thermal stimuli have a considerably greater impact on peripheral circulation in this group than in previous ages. This doesn't mean that the body is broken. It just means that the same decision, the same glass of water, produces different effects depending on at what point in the life cycle it is made. The temperature of the water on an empty stomach is no small detail. It is a signal that the vascular system receives before any other stimulus of the day. And what it does with that signal depends largely on the age of the person sending it. We are going to compare these two options point by point with 5 specific criteria, so that by the end of this video, you can decide based on information, not assumptions. The first criterion is the one that surprises most people because it speaks to something that many men feel every morning without knowing how to explain it. Cold water on an empty stomach causes peripheral vasoconstriction. The blood vessels constrict in response to the drop in temperature deleter. In a young and elastic circulatory system, this contraction is brief and the body adapts quickly. In a man over 50, research indicates that this is more pronounced and takes longer to reverse, which means that the worst part of the morning can pass with reduced peripheral circulation. Warm water works in the opposite direction. Instead of causing vascular contraction, it supports the reactivation process that the body is already trying to execute upon waking. Research on the vascular response to thermal stimuli indicates that water at a temperature close to body temperature facilitates progressive vasodilation without generating the peak of thermal stress of cold water. The advantage is clear: warm water. After 50, the circulatory system emerges from sleep in a slower state of adaptation. Any stimulus that runs counter to that process adds time to the morning recovery period. What many men feel as this slow start may be directly related to the first thermal stimulus of the day, but temperature is not the only metafactor. What happens to the stomach and by extension to the blood flow to the digestive organs tells a different story. The stomach on an empty stomach is especially sensitive to temperature changes. Cold water stimulates contractions of the digestive tract more intensely than at neutral temperature. In some men, this generates a redistribution of blood flow to the digestive area that can affect the energy available to the rest of the body during the first few minutes solids. Many men report that feeling of mild gastric discomfort immediately after drinking the first cold glass and do not associate it with the temperature. Warm water on an empty stomach is processed by the stomach with less effort. Research on gastric motility indicates that the digestive tract responds more orderly to warm water without the peaks of contraction that can be caused by the cold thermal contrast. This means that morning blood flow is distributed more efficiently from the very beginning. Again, warm water has the advantage. Gastric sensitivity increases with age. What was indifferent at 30 can generate a diet response after 50 that men interpret as a sensitive stomach without associating it with a habit that has been repeated for years. And there is a third criterion that almost no one mentions, and that is directly connected to what many men notice in terms of energy during the first hours of the day. After a night's sleep, body temperature is at its lowest point in the 24-hour cycle. The body is already working to raise it naturally. Drinking cold water at that time adds an extra thermal load to this process. The body must expend additional energy to maintain its internal temperature while it tries to reactivate itself. In men over 50, research on circadian thermal regulation indicates that this double load reactivation plus thermal compensation can be noticeable as greater fatigue in the early morning. Warm water does not generate this additional load. The body can dedicate its morning metabolic resources to circulatory and energy reactivation without having to compensate for a drop in internal temperature. Many men report a noticeable difference in how they feel during the first hour when they switch from cold to warm water on an empty stomach. Third criterion, warm water. Thermoregulation is one of the processes that changes the most with age. At 55, the body handles temperature changes more slowly and at a greater energy cost than at 30. This cost, repeated every morning for years, adds up. There is one more myth, the quietest of all, the one that most men repeat without question, precisely because it seems innocent. And it has to do with the morning vascular response. There is a part of this mechanism that cannot be compared in a single video. What happens in the blood vessels during the first thermal stimulus of the day does not end there. Research on peripheralization indicates that this initial response of contraction or for facilitation has constantly exciting processes that go on throughout the morning. What you feel 2 hours after waking up, the temperature of your extremities, your clarity, and the level of available energy are all rooted in that first vessel. What the body does with the first thermal stimulus of the day is not limited to the immediate minutes. This response travels, and in men over 50, it travels further and lasts longer than at previous ages. That is why I prepared the digital book, 7 Habits That Make You Wake Up Tired After 40 Inside. Inside you will I find which of your morning habits are directly connected to the vascular response that occurs in the first part of the day and that you have never related to how you feel in the middle of the morning. Why does the circulatory system of a man over 50 process thermal stimuli differently and more slowly? And what does that mean in practical terms each morning? A first concrete adjustment that you can implement this week without reorganizing any other part of your routine. Designed for the man who wants to act on the root cause, not just relieve what he feels. And there is a detail that I do not cover in this video. Among the 7 habits, there is one directly related to morning vasoconstriction, which most repeat in their fasting routine without knowing what they are accumulating. If any of this sounded familiar, I left the link in the pinned comment. Check it out. Now that you know, you drink cold or warm water on an empty stomach. Comment 1 if cold, 2 if warm. I want to see how many people this video reaches in time. Let's go to the 4th criterion. This is the one that many men do not expect and the one that changes the most widespread argument in favor of cold water. One of the most repeated arguments in favor of cold water on an empty stomach is that it activates the metabolism. What almost no one explains is that this activation has a cost. The body prioritizes thermal compensation over immediate absorption. Research on gastric absorption indicates that cold water can travel through the stomach more quickly, possibly because the body tries to free itself from this cold stimulus as soon as possible, which can reduce effective absorption at that first moment of the day. Warm water on an empty stomach tends to be processed more calmly by the digestive system. Research indicates that intestinal absorption is more efficient when there is no sudden thermal contrast that accelerates gastric transit. Many men report that when switching to warm water on an empty stomach, They feel less need to immediately have another glass as if the first drink were enough. Fourth criterion, warm water. Digestive efficiency decreases with age. If the first glass of the day is incompletely absorbed due to the effect of thermal contrast, the actual hydration that morning may be less than the man thinks, even if he has drunk the same amount of water. And there is a fifth criterion that connects up all of the above, one that many men have experienced without knowing what to call it. A day of cold water fasting doesn't change anything dramatically, but this habit isn't repeated one day. It's repeated every morning for years. Research on chronic vascular stress suggests that systematically repeated morning vasoconstriction patterns can contribute to a perceived decrease in vascular elasticity in the long term during the first part of the day, not as an acute event, but as a response that the body learns to anticipate. The effect of switching to warm water fasting isn't felt on the first day either, but many men report that in the weeks following the change, they notice differences in how they feel during the first hour. Less heaviness in the limbs, a smoother start up, less time needed to warm up. Nothing spectacular, just real. Fifth criterion, warm water, especially in the long term. After 50, the adaptation window of the circulatory system narrows. A habit that was indifferent for years can start to have noticeable consequences when that window decreases. The good news is that changing it costs exactly the same as maintaining it, only in the opposite direction. Now, before the verdict, I want you to meet three men who experienced exactly this. Miguel is 61 years old and lives in Bilbao. He had been drinking a large glass of cold water as soon as he woke up for over a decade. He had read somewhere that it activated the metabolism and was good for the system. For years, he didn't notice anything special. But after he turned 58, he began to notice that the mornings were harder for him. His hands took a long time to warm up, even if the floor was warm. And in the first 2 hours of the day, he felt like he was working at half speed. He didn't relate it to the water. He related it to the years. A relative told him that he had changed from cold water to warm water on an empty stomach. Miguel tried it without much conviction. In the following weeks, he noticed that his morning warm-up period was somewhat shorter. Not radically different, but noticeably different. Carlos is 57 years old and lives in Seville. He had given up coffee on an empty stomach years ago. Instead, he drank plenty of cold water. First of all, he was disciplined about it. What he didn't understand was why, despite hydrating well from the first hour, he continued to feel that heaviness in his legs until afternoon. His doctor had told him that his circulation was not bad for his age. When he read about the morning vascular response and the water temperature, he decided to make the change without telling anyone, so as not to feel like he was overcomplicating something simple. Several days a week in the following weeks, he noticed that the heaviness in his legs took less time to disappear in the morning. It still wasn't perfect, but the difference was enough for him to stick with it. The information you are receiving is educational. It is not a substitute for medical advice. If your symptoms persist, talk to a health professional. And the third case is the one I like to tell skeptics the most. Antonio is 64 years old and lives in Zaragoza. Cold water, warm water. It seemed to him that there were more important things to worry about. But his son passed him a video on the subject and he tried it for a month, almost out of curiosity. What he noticed was not dramatic. The first 15 minutes of the morning were a bit easier. My feet, which always took a long time to warm up, took a little less time, and the slight discomfort I felt in my stomach upon waking, which I had assumed was inevitable, almost completely disappeared on the days I drank warm water. Antonio remained skeptical about many things. About warm water on an empty stomach? I'm not proposing anything. A week of warm water on an empty stomach. Just that. Without changing any other habits. 7 days. And tell me in the comments if you noticed any difference in that first part of the morning. The verdict is this. Warm water on an empty stomach wins in all 5 criteria for the profile of a man over 50. Not because all water is harmful in absolute terms, but because the circulatory system of this age group responds to thermal stimuli more slowly, more pronouncedly, more pronouncedly, and with a higher energy cost than at earlier stages, which is irrelevant to a man of 30. For a 55-year-old man, it has consequences that are felt, even if they are not identified, every morning. Cold water has its moment after physical activity in the afternoon, when the circulatory system has already been active for at least an hour. Right upon waking from your night's rest fasting, that is not the time. First drink of the day, warm water. The rest of the day, the temperature matters much less. It is not about eliminating cold water. It is about saving it for when the body can handle it without additional cost. Have you seen something today that seems small? A glass of water, a temperature, nothing dramatic. And yet, behind that decision, repeated every morning for years, there is a specific mechanism that affects how your circulatory system starts up each day. Warm water on an empty stomach is not a remedy. It is not a magic solution. It is about aligning the first step of the day with what your body is already trying to do on its own. Reactivating itself progressively, without surprises, without additional burdens. You can change this tonight. It doesn't require any preparation, nor anything you don't already have. It just requires knowing why. And now you know. Start tomorrow for 7 days. And tell me in the comments what you noticed. Small changes taken seriously make a difference that the calendar can't erase. And the first change worth taking seriously is understanding which of your habits are taking the biggest toll on you each and every silent night. Because what your circulatory system does during sleep is not independent of what you do with it in the hours surrounding that sleep. The cost isn't immediate, it's cumulative. And cumulative is exactly the kind of cost that's hardest to reverse. Get the ebook 7 Habits That Make You Wake Up Tired After 40 now and understand which habits are interfering with your vascular recovery each night while in. It's going to happen tonight anyway. The question is whether it happens with the right habit or the wrong one. The morning vascular response doesn't wait. The link is in the pinned comment. Check that to see if you're repeating the wrong thermal stimulus at the first moment of the day tonight. Until next time, I'm Carmen Navarro. Stay informed. Stay vital. Your best years are not behind you. They can start now. Important note. This video is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Always consult your physician before making any changes.